photographer, and I
This
found
meeting
out...
is being recorded.
I'm being recorded. And I didn't know till this evening that he is in fact an author, and we have his book on sale as well, Earth Dream, The Marriage of Reason and Intuition. And then the very wonderful poet Emma Storr, together they've written this book, Offcumdens. And I picked up her book with a great deal of knowledge and affection, and realized that I'd actually written a comment on the back. It was probably about 4 years ago now. Yeah, well, so without more ado, oh, I need to say also, we have a special, rather wonderful guest who's going to be reading halfway through this event, Helen Mort, whose books include Never Leave the Dog Behind, Our Love of Dogs, and the one that's going to be published very soon, A Line Above the Sky on Mountains and Motherhood. I'm sensing a theme here, and a theme which fits in very beautifully with this extraordinarily beautiful book, Offcumdens. And I feel privileged to be in this kind of front row of Offcumdens, because we've all come up from down south and stayed. I think I've probably been here the longest. I've been here 50 years. How long have you been here?
30.
30.
25.
See, 100 years between us, 120 years between us. Are we proper Yorkshire people yet? So, without more ado, I'd like to sort of just open the discussion with these two very brilliant people about how this book came about, how it evolved, how it grew. It's a book of photographs and poems, and it kind of, like all the very best books, tells a most beautiful story. So, Bob and Emma, where did this book come from? How did it start?
But the extraordinary thing is, it started literally where we're sitting. I just realised how close. I think it was literally here, at a similar event to this, Candlestick Press, where we both happened to be gone along to hear some poets, and we started talking. Over to you.
Yes, well, we started talking, and Bob gave me his card, which gave me his website, and he told me he was a photographer, and I thought that was interesting. So I looked at his website and found these absolutely beautiful black and white images of Yorkshire. And there was something about them being black and white and not colour that really appealed to me. So I thought that was interesting. And over many months, we got to know each other. And when we knew each other a little bit better, I asked him if I could write a poem inspired by some of his photographs.
How could I say no?
I mean, I'm finding the kind of decision making here quite interesting. Which came first, the images or the poems, or did the poem come first and then you went out with your camera to find the image? What happened? How did it work?
At the beginning, it was definitely images. Emma found some pictures of mine, and she wrote these poems based upon what she'd seen. But then it evolved, and then Emma presented me with some poems, and I went out first of all in my archive to see if I could find some pictures that matched. And then we went on some ventures together to try and see if we can photograph some of the locations where she'd written her poems. So it's very, it evolved very organically.
Yes, yes. And what's nice is we reflected that in the book, in the notes at the back. So if the poem came first, then my note comes first, and then Bob's explanation about the image he chose. But usually it was the other way around, that I was writing a poem inspired by Bob's photographs.
And the nice thing is that this is a poetry book with notes, not unreadable like T.S. Eliot's notes, but actually very comprehensible, and also a conversation between the two artists, because what is so brilliant is you have two people working in different mediums, and they don't cancel each other out. They complement each other in their work. So black and white. I like black and white photographs. What was the decision here? What was that about?
Well, I think we took it for granted fairly early on that it should be black and white. And it's hard to say why black and white has such a deep emotional impact. But it's something I discovered about 10 years ago. I've always been a photographer, but all through bringing up kids, it sort of took a back seat. I got back into it about 10 years ago when a friend introduced me to this sort of site called Blip Photo, where you can only post one photograph a day. And it was like an antidote to the whole Facebook thing where people splurge pictures on. So the fact that you can only take one picture a day made you think about photography. And I started posting there and posting every day. And I started to get inspired by other people posting black and white. And I was drawn into their photographs. I couldn't really understand what it was that was attracting me. And then I started playing around myself and grown to love it. And I can't really describe why it works. You sort of, it takes away the particulars. It becomes less of a representation and more akin to a poem in a way. Just like a poem is the representation of something, you're alluding to things. With black and white, you can allude to pattern and structure. There's a certain mystery to it. And that's why I think it works so well with poetry.
Yeah, and the poetry, Emma, is written in many forms, from free verse to sonnets, the whole thing. Was that fun? Did the poems say to you, I need to be a sonnet, or I need to be a villain? I don't think there is a villain.
No, there isn't a villain.
They are
Very
really
hard
to write.
Yes, I mean, I've always liked experimenting with different poetic forms.
Sure.
And I think some of the poems started off as one form, and I realised that wasn't going to work. But I really enjoyed experimenting, and it was great fun. And choosing the images to write the poem for, yes, it evolved fairly sort of organically, really. I did choose haiku, which I'll read a series of haiku a bit later on for a particular poem. And I like writing sonnets, as I know you do.
Yeah.
So there are 2 or 3 sonnets in the book.
Yeah.
But I didn't think, right, this photograph has to be free verse. I mean, I tried and tried again and saw what came out, really.
I mean, it seems to me that your poems, when they're kind of touching on the image, are like characters talking about the place. And it seems that place is very important in this book. Did you have a tussle over which places you were going to write about a photograph, or did you have some of the same places in mind?
Well, Bob has thousands of photographs, so he sent me some that he thought might work. I did say to him there was a limit to how many poems I could write about solitary trees. There's an awful lot of photographs of solitary trees.
Words would play your whole career.
I know, and I might read one. But,
She rejected so many of my trees.
but the lovely thing about Bob's photos is that they're very varied. You know, there's street photography,
Yes.
there's landscape, there's buildings. So I had a huge choice of things to look at. And then, as Bob said, you know, sometimes I had written a poem some years ago and said, could you find an image to go with this? But, you know, all the way along, we were talking about it and also showing each other the work. And I would send the poem to Bob and ask him what he thought. And, you know, he gave me very good and honest feedback. And, no, I don't think this bit works quite so well. So there was a lot of, you know, editing and trying again, as well as actually taking the poems to other workshops and other groups of poets who helped me.
Yeah, I mean, you comment somewhere in the book about the amount of work that went into some of these finished poems. And I think for people who are not poets, they don't quite get that. There's a lot of digging away in the dark, isn't that, about it exactly doing what you wanted to do?
Yes, and I mean, it evolved over 3 years.
Yeah.
So actually, I think I wrote 12 poems in a year, but there are 41 poems in the book. So there was a point at which I was having to write a lot quicker, but I said to the publisher, I can't write too fast because they won't be good enough poems. So, you know.
You can't force these things.
You can't.
I was very privileged, and I guess not too many people get the opportunity to see poems evolve. So Emma would show me a fairly early draft, and I would get to see subsequent drafts until we get to the finished product. And it's amazing how much it changed throughout the lifetime of that poem.
True.
And you see, you can't force a poem. I mean, I have some beautiful images which I really wanted in the book, But poems didn't happen. You know, you can't force it.
No.
So was the actual sort of making the photographs a different kind of thing? You don't go back and edit and rework. You take a photograph and you try and get it to how you want it to be.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever a case where I changed a photograph to match a poem. But there's a lot of work that does go into the processing, and that's something I discovered fairly recently. I have this little camera here. This is all I use. It goes in my pocket, goes everywhere. I take a lot of pictures, but the work is in what's called the digital darkroom. I bring them back, I crop them and process them and play around with them to try and get the best out of what I'm taking. Yeah.
And the other thing, I mean, I was very struck, having spent a year getting an order of a collection of mine in the right order. How did you decide on the ordering of the book? I kind of looked at it and I thought, I wouldn't know where to begin because I've got images and photographs. Were there debates, strong debates?
No, not
Not
strong
at all.
debates. I mean, I think we tried different orders and we wanted variety of both image and poem. So, you know, we didn't want all the landscape photos stuck together and all the street photography stuck together. So they're sprinkled, and the poems equally. But I think probably the publisher, I don't think she changed anything in the orders. So again, it was a sort of discussion between us and a bit with Nadia about what we thought worked. We'll see what you think.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it works beautifully. I'm completely. Did you know when you had finished?
It's a good question.
Because you know, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
We had a time scale because when we first approached the publisher, Fairacre Press, with 12 poems and 12 images, she said, I'm interested, but you need to send me some more. And then we sent her 23. And she said, yes, I definitely want to publish you. And I'd like to get, I think she gave us a deadline, which, you know, a rough deadline, which was actually very useful because I'm much better working to deadlines.
She speeded up at the end.
I did speed up, hugely. Yes, so
in fact, we submitted 42 in the end.
Yes,
and
she
there was
rejected
one, which was pretty good. Yeah.
And did you feel that her choice was a good one? That rejection was.
It wasn't right.
We both knew it wasn't right, and it was sort of forced at the end. Yeah.
There's this thing. I mean, I was in a primary school the other day, and I was talking about editing and redrafting, which you clearly believe in, as I do. And an 8-year-old child, said to me, "But James, I've made it worse, sir." Yeah, there is that point when you go too far. Did you have that as an issue?
Yes, definitely. And then sometimes I went back to the version before. I mean, not so much presumably with your photographs.
No, I definitely had the easier job, to be honest.
You made cups of tea.
Yeah, just looked after her.
Now, I'm really fascinated. We're all kind of refugees from London. Could this book have happened if we were all living in different parts of inner and greater London? Would you have written the same kind of book?
No. I mean, I think for me, Yorkshire's been incredibly inspiring. I think the variety of countryside, the people, you know, I just wasn't expecting to enjoy Yorkshire so much when I moved here in '93, but actually I'm totally converted to being a northerner.
Yeah. How about you? You're the same.
Absolutely. Yorkshire's home. And whenever I go down south now, much as I enjoy a day trip to London, I'm sort of counting the hours until I get back again. And I mean, that all started at university when I went potholing in the Yorkshire Dales.
There's always a point where I can see the Parkinson Tower and I think I'm almost home. Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. Now, what I love about these photographs and these poems is that they have people in them too. Was that important for you to get them in?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean, when I first started on my photography journey 10 years ago, it was nothing but landscapes. It was just pictures of Ilkley Moor, random scenes on my bike. You know, there wasn't a single person in a photograph in the first year of posting. And then I discovered that was actually quite boring. And I started getting more interested in people, and I went completely the other way. And now almost all my pictures have people in them. Even if I'm taking a landscape photograph, trying to get a person if it's possible. Not always possible, but it helps. It gives context. And the Yorkshire people are wonderful.
And for me, it was an opportunity to write stories, which I like doing.
Yes.
So I was sort of using my imagination to, in some of the street photography, not all of it, to sort of think what's going on in this particular scene and invent it. And that was very stimulating for me. It was very good.
One of my favourite photographs, it is a young woman busking with a fiddle. Tell us about that photograph, Bob.
Right. Well, she was not busking, not very far from here. And there's a little interesting anecdote about the library. The reading room just here is supposed to be the quiet room.
Yeah, but you can
in the summer with the windows open, it gets really noisy because the buskers outside. Sometimes that can be quite cool.
Yeah.
Other times, when busking isn't quite so good, it can be very annoying. But I was coming to the library one morning, and this girl, Sam, just had a violin and a beatbox, and she was laying down these tracks and playing over them, and it was mesmerising, this music. And I have this project where I take a photograph of somebody every day, which I post to this same site. So she was a natural target for me. So I took a few pictures of her playing, and I asked if I could take a portrait. And that was one of the pictures that Emma found and wanted to write a poem about, because she heard Sam play too. I had to take her along to listen, have her own personal
What
concert.
was it about? Was it about the reality or the photograph that you wanted to write about? What was it?
Oh, I think it made a huge difference that I'd actually met Sam and heard her play. So I just thought this, I mean, it is an image of beauty. She's a very beautiful woman, but also the music she was producing was so beautiful. And I wanted to capture that in a few words, really.
And there's also, I mean, you talk about telling stories, but there's also another favourite poem, written from the dog's point of view. Was that fun to write?
That was great fun, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
think that was a character that Bob had photographed many times
in Shipley. And we removed a head because we didn't think it was right to.
That sounds awful.
Well, yeah, it does really, doesn't it? We made her anonymous, but in fact, I think it made for a more interesting photograph in a way. The fact you couldn't see her.
Yes.
If you look at the book, it sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? If you look at the book, you'll understand.
Did this collaboration throw up anything interesting, anything surprising? Were you kind of taken by surprise on any occasions at all when you found what you were photographing and what you were writing about? Did it surprise you?
For me, I mean, it's a way the combination works. I think when I read Emma's poem for the first time, I was finding I was then looking at the image more closely, and then actually saw things I hadn't seen before. It forced me to look more closely, and I think that's one of the things we're hoping the book will engender in both ways. That by looking at the photographs, people get more from the poems, and vice versa. By reading the poems, people then see more things in the photographs. But that worked on me. Just reading Emma's poem made me see more in the photograph than I'd originally acknowledged.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because I've been to exhibitions where the writing almost says again what the photograph says, but I think you both found different ways in to say slightly different things, which is absolutely brilliant. Do you have favourite images and poems, pairs in the book individually?
I don't think we've discussed this, but I certainly do.
Yes, I think we do, definitely.
So what are your favourites?
Oh, I love the Leeds Library one.
Yeah.
I like your Kissing Gate because of its simplicity and the shape and the colour, the colour, the black and white sort of shading of it. And actually, I love the wall, the dry stone wall that's sort of curving up into the distance. Although there's quite a lot of dry stone walls in this.
Quite a few walls indeed.
And how about you?
I guess my favourite combination perhaps is West Riding Pauper Lunatic Asylum, because there's a story in Menston, because there's a story behind the photograph, and the poem is one of my very favourites. It's very deep and very beautiful, and I think that combination works really well. The picture I took of the Tour de France on Côte de Cray, I think again the image and the words work really well. They're the two most obvious ones.
It sounds like you're having lots of fun. Was it almost too much fun to stop, or did you know that you actually had to? Were you having lots of fun?
I was having a massive amount of fun. I think Emma got exhausted towards the end.
No, I had great fun, definitely. And it was fun planning expeditions too, you know, not just using the images that Bob had already taken, but there's, you know, we went to Hull on a special expedition and the poem came out of that one. And I took you to the Huggett Poetry Bench, which you haven't been to before, in the Wolds.
And the Yorkshire Sculpture Park.
And the Sculpture Park.
Yes.
So, you know.
In fact, there's a lovely story there. But do you want to share it?
No, you tell me.
Well, I mean, serendipity has been a big part of my life for the last 10 years. It never ceases to amaze me how often I am at the right place at the right time. To my great shame, I've never been to the Yorkshire Sculpture Park before. And one of those things that just never happened for various reasons. So Emma took me finally. It was a beautiful day. It wasn't, you know, during lockdown at some point. Can't remember exactly when. And there's these 4 Henry Moors quite close to where you start, and called the upright motifs. And there was this guy watching them, and it was really cool because he was, you know, got his sons and was cleaning them. It's one of those things.
One of those poles with a, you know, brush.
You don't sort of take into account that someone actually has to clean these pieces of art. And of course, I wasn't really interested in the art, the actual mechanism of this being clean. So I took a photograph which appears in the book of Mick. And he was a lovely guy. We chatted to him afterwards. I took his portrait. It was only later, when I got back home and looked at my photographs, that we had Ian Macmillan in the photograph.
The poet.
That's extraordinary.
And
Did you know he was there?
Well, yes, we did.
We met him about an hour later. He's with his grandson.
Yeah.
And the other bizarre aspect of this is he had just reviewed Emma's pamphlet, Heart Murmur. So
it was rather extraordinary.
So we had this little conversation. We're both quite shy people, really. And I was like, go on, introduce yourself. You know, and Emma said, no.
He's the warmest person.
Absolutely. So we had a lovely conversation. And then I sent Ian the picture, make sure he was happy for us to include in the book. And bizarrely, the portrait I took of Ian that day is actually using in his new collection. So there's a lot. One little meeting, and all these little stories happen.
I expect to hear you both on the Verb one Friday night at 10 o'clock or whatever time it's on. That's absolutely brilliant. You've given us a kind of insight into how long this project has taken, 3 years. And there'll be people in the audience who are wondering about the whole getting published thing. What was the process like and how did it work? Did you go around with hat in hand begging, or did you send off lots of proposals to different publishers?
Well, first we did our research, of course. We went and saw what was out there already. Were there very, you know, and there weren't very many books of photographs paired with poems. There were some, but we thought ours could still have a niche.
Yeah.
And then we also looked at publishers, didn't we, to see who published sort of coffee table books that might be interested. And we sent off, you know, we spent a long time writing a proposal, finding out how you did that for various publishers. And we sent off 2 quite detailed proposals with the 12 poems and photographs as examples. Heard absolutely nothing. But Fairacre Press had published an anthology of NHS staff poems called These Are the Hands in 2019 or 2020. And I had 2 poems in that. So I thought, Fairacre Press, I wonder whether actually they might be interested, because I knew Nadia published books that were a little bit unusual, and there were combinations of the visual and the verbal. So we approached her and she was very kind and said, oh, I'm interested. So that was how that came about. So we only actually went to 3 publishers.
But you didn't hear from the first 2
Didn't
at
hear,
all?
and never heard.
Never. Which I think is not atypical.
This is what happens. Yeah, this is what happens. You know, I think there's the writing has to be good. They have to like it, and you have to have a pretty good measure of luck to be in the right place at the right time.
And we've been very lucky.
Yeah, I mean, you've also written and produced a most beautiful book. It's not a coincidence. Will you work together again, do you think? Is it too soon? Is it too soon?
No, Bob already said, let's do islands.
That was my first idea. I love islands, and that could make a lovely project. And the excuse to have some little trips.
Yes, possibly.
Research.
We'll see how this one goes.
We can write it off, tax write-off.
That would be brilliant. That would be brilliant. So I'm interested in the commentaries at the back. We mentioned those, where you have what seems to be a little conversation about the different poems and pictures in the book. Did they happen as an afterthought, or were you just recording them at the time?
We wrote them pretty much all together when we had everything completed. And I think, I'm not quite sure where the idea came from now, but it was something we both were very keen to do. I think some of it is driven by my attendance at a lot of poetry readings. And I've always found that the poems are much more accessible when there's a little bit of an introduction to understand where the poems come from. And I've also found that at music gigs, when someone actually introduces a song and actually describes where it's come from and the story behind it, that makes it just gives the thing a different context, a deeper context. And I thought the same again. If people, we wanted to try and have some information about where the picture was taken, but then that evolved a little bit into a little story. And I hope it just adds an extra dimension to the book.
It really does. It really, really does. I think it's time to have some words, and I'm hoping that we can magic Helen Mort up from where Derbyshire, I think she might be, to read for 10 minutes, and then Emma is going to read. I think Carol is going to press the essential buttons. Helen.
Shall I do that?
Is there something on that?
Hello.
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 Hi.
Helen, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Wow, this is a technological marvel, and it's very surreal to see myself in a real space, but on a screen as well in a real space.
That's fantastic. It's so lovely to have you here. We're wondering whether you might read for us from your
Absolutely.
writing.
Yeah, and what a fascinating discussion about the book. And I'm extremely sad not to be in one of my favourite buildings and favourite spaces in person, listening to poetry and talking about poetry with you all. So yeah, very, very sad not to be there, but delighted that there's the good thing to come out of the pandemic is our confidence of being able to make these slightly unconventional hybrid setups work. So yeah, yes, I'll read without further ado then. And I just wanted to congratulate Bob and Emma and Nadia from Fairacre, which is a press that I absolutely love, on a beautiful book, both visually and production wise, and in the words and the way the words and the images speak to one another. So I thought in tribute to Offcumdens, I've sort of loosely structured my reading around the idea of image and responding to image, and a bit of Yorkshire as well. Is the sound okay for you all? Can you all hear? Okay. So I'm going to start off with a piece which is almost like be interested to get Bob's take on the idea of photographing animals and creatures, and this sense that you sometimes might get when you're being photographed back. So this is about one particular creature that I met on the Royal Mile in Edinburgh, and it's just called Eagle Owl Royal Mile. If its satchel-coloured eyes could be bought, admit it, you would. If the autumn of its plumage could be gathered in, you would. If you could follow its gaze, not the glance from keeper's glove to coins, from rain to audience, but that further, days-deep runway stare. You would long to be its shadow, you would beg for air, and it would look straight through you for a moment, as if you were there. And I'll move to Yorkshire for this second piece. I hope this isn't a terribly cliched thing to say, but I've always been a huge admirer of Remains of Elmet. And when I first read the way the poems and the images work together, I was thinking of that collaboration and that kind of pairing, and how this had a different tone, but something of that synergy. So I was thinking about that particular landscape, that Yorkshire, Lancashire kind of border. So this is a poem that's set in that region. It's just called Hill. Each time I think of you, you're halfway up a hill you've never climbed before. Autumn, the Calder Valley chimneys breathing light, the beech trees mimicking a corner of night, black trunks, the spans between them tiny measures of the sky. Up here, the walks you haven't taken grow precise, undone and certain, tightening like the hand of the day. Although I'm 7 hills away, I'd like to tell you, somewhere on the map, there must be plains we do not know about, towns with names no one can list, and ordinary hidden lakes, a single cloud shaped nothing like a leaf. I mean to say, there must be better ways of putting things, unwritten routes, stone-knuckled paths to overshoot, words practiced till they come out rough. And from this height, and on this tilted Yorkshire earth, it seems enough. And I'll read a few new poems, if I may, that are also to do with the image in some way. My next collection is kind of has a visual component to it as well, I suppose. It's not out until this summer, but it sort of deals with, amongst other things, the history of tattooed female bodies and the idea of the tattooed lady, and it's called The Illustrated Woman as a sort of a nod to Ray Bradbury. And I got fascinated by the history of tattooed ladies in circus contexts, particularly in Victorian times, where it was one of the only professions where a working class woman could earn more than her male counterpart, because it was more shocking and more taboo. But of course, there was still a lot of, there was a double standard. And there were also lots of fanciful stories about how these women had come to be tattooed, usually with a extremely racist dimension. In America, it was usually that they had been kidnapped and tattooed forcibly by indigenous people. And this was part of the narrative. And in reality, it was usually their husband or their brother who tattooed them as a family money-making scheme. So I've got really interested in the stories we tell about inked female bodies and the stories that people might write on their own skin. That was an extremely long introduction for a very short series of poems, but I will I'll just sorry, I'll just call these up on my screen. So these are from the sequence, The Illustrated Woman. I'm going to start with a found poem, entirely other words and other people's words, just arranged by me, to show that perhaps some of these double standards and things about how we might view the female body, the female tattooed body, haven't changed that much in some ways, despite the ubiquity of body art. So this is taken from an article in Psychology Today magazine about what men really think of women with tattoos. And it had this phrase that I was fascinated by, a well-known beach, which kept coming up over and over. And I was thinking, well, this is what happens if you're preoccupied with landscape. I was like, what do you mean a well-known beach? Which beach? So this is a well-known beach. This study examined the approach behaviour of men to women lying on a well-known beach. The women were reading, well-known, lying flat on their stomachs, some with a tattoo prominently displayed on their lower backs. On a well-known beach, women were reading flat on their well-known stomachs, some with a tattoo on their lower backs, some without. On a well-known beach, men were more likely to approach the women with visible tattoos, not because they found them to be more attractive, but because the women, well-known, reading on their lower backs, because they believed the tattooed women, the men, well-known, the women lying on their flat stomachs, but because they believed the tattooed women would be more likely to have sex, well-known, prominently displayed on their lower backs, more likely to have sex on the first date than their clear-skinned counterparts. And I'll read some shorter tattoo poems, and I think that will be my time up actually. This is a short piece which mentions kind of, it's sort of obliquely to do with the idea of Offcumdens. It's about being in a landscape that's not the landscape you're familiar with in some way, and in my case, feeling quite homesick. The nurse with her questions about tattoos, her discreet scratch at the crook of my arm, her careful drawing forth, her, did you have it done somewhere reputable? And me, wide-eyed, fen-sick, miles from home, dreaming of was each night and stones shaped like eagles, saying quickly, it's on my back, it's just on my back, not knowing the difference between where and whereabouts, not knowing which way precisely to look. And I think I'll do two more tattooed lady poems if that's okay. One which is a kind of tribute to female tattooists, and one about the idea of permanence, I suppose. And again, thinking about photographs and freezing a moment and visual imagery. This is a tribute to a female artist called Lou Hopper, and it's just called Lou. If you've ever watched that program on Channel 4, Tattoo Fixers, the first series, you will have seen Lou at work, and she's a brilliant artist. Lou, when she joins the dots on my sternum, make swifts and clover flesh. I want to be a tree with my marks telling stories. To be read like that, rings of age, endurance. We have been skimmed over too long, searched at airports, scanned by our wary mothers, or men who approve so much they won't shut up about it, wanting to touch the patterns they can't see. We have adopted wild poses. We have chosen to surface what's inside and wear it brightly. If we stand together, we become stone torsos, unknown forms, a circle, weird and steadfast in the middle of a sun-abandoned field. We are so unnatural. We've been here forever, inscribed by hail and hands, improved by the art of spiders. Lean against us now. Try to move us. See what gives first. And finally, this is a piece inspired by the idea of the permanent mark. And I always think of poetry as a kind of the most permanent mark of all, more so than tattooing, the idea that you have these words that you carry around with you forever. So this is about the idea of beauty, I suppose, as well. And I wanted, again, to congratulate Emma and Bob on a truly, truly beautiful book. It was a pleasure to get to see it at an early stage before it was printed, and then to actually hold it in my hands. It's wonderful. And happy launch evening. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing reading from the book most of all. This is a little piece called On Permanence. My friend says tattoos hide the natural beauty of the naked form. We are swimming at the mill ponds. He steps into cold water and his skin dissolves. My friend has seen me naked 3 times. We do not speak of it, whether he found me beautiful in the morning. Pure skin, he says, pure design. Around him, the water is gorgeous with stirred up mud, silt hanging in slow clouds. On the bank, I stare down at my legs. I love how the peonies on my right hip include the petal of my deepest glassy scar, how the moles that might kill me are stamens on flowers, how my cellulite gives texture to sketched gritstone, and the swifts on my chest are the heart in clumsy motion. I do not think I long to be natural, pure like the floors of airports, like a blank expression, the aftermath of the avalanche that buried your body whole. Each night in the bath, my 2-year-old tries to colour me with his pastel crayons, finishing mummy's pictures. He can't leave a page untouched, paints with his fists and feet, pencils the walls. In water, we are all works in progress, disturbing the surface of the green pond. It is always difficult to start. The stones unbalance me. I fall to my knees like a veteran, survivor of wars of my body's own making. Colposcopy, biopsy, sertraline and stitched tears. Let me stay here for a moment. Let me kneel before the sky and let me be humble and tidy. Let me be decorated. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your launch. I'm looking so enviously at the beautiful room and the warmth of the occasion and all the books on the shelves. Yeah, I hope my giant face on the screen hasn't been too surreal and off-putting for everyone. And,
I'll just wait for Carl to turn off the screen. You'll have to tell me if that's okay in terms. Okay, great. Gosh, that was so lovely. It was so sad Helen couldn't be here, but really, really lovely to hear her read. So thank goodness for technology. So I'm going to read some of the poems from the book and the images that, well, the photographs that Bob took are some of which are displayed next door. So those are the poems that match them. And I'm going to start with the Leeds Library because, as Bob said, that's where we first met. It was at a poetry event hosted by James for the Candlestick Press.
You're not holding me responsible.
No. But we both then joined the library, having never been here before. And it's a place we really like to come and meet and work. And I've often looked at some of the books, particularly in the gallery up here, and thought, I wonder how often they get taken down and read. So this is a poem in the voice of a library book. The Leeds Library. I can't remember when a searching hand stopped to touch my covers, run a finger down my spine embossed with golden letters. Stories stay within my brittle pages, my chapters filled with worlds no one explores. I have no eyes, no ears to hear the words, but in my paper heart, I long for Jane to lift me down, release my printed voice from dust and dark. I'm indexed, stamped, and shelved with other tomes. I haven't moved in years. My vellum neighbours keep me shut, upright. When footsteps on the spiral stairs approach, the metal walkway quivers, and I hope to be retrieved, removed, and browsed, chosen. So the next next poem, and Bob's already referenced it, the West Riding Pauper Lunatic Asylum, which was built in 1888 and became High Royds Psychiatric Hospital, which I think closed in 2003 and is now rather posh flats and houses. This was an expedition that Bob and I went on together because I wanted to go around High Royds and have a look. And then I got very interested in its history and did a bit of research and found that at one time, like many big asylums, it was almost a self-sufficient community. So it had its own dairy, its own butchery, a shop, and it carried out farming and market gardening. It also had an orchestra, a choir, a ballroom, and lots of entertainments that took place. So I know, of course, there were abuses in these institutions, but I'm interested in the idea of asylum as a place of safety too. And every ward apparently had a canary. So this is West Riding Pauper Lunatic Asylum. Is this home? I forget. Stains on green and brown walls are clouds above my bed. I watch the ward canary fly from its cage towards the light. Sometimes it grips its perch, stays within the bars. Sometimes I prefer the dim inside, the dull calm. They say it might be good for us to have fresh air, to weed and rake the flower beds and walk the grounds as if we're free. Marshall tried to hang himself. The gaslight bracket broke. Lavatory chains can't be looped into a noose or knot. We are watched over, overseen. Did I mention the orchestra? Music made from lunatic strings. Brass and drums, we beat the wildest rhythms, dance our madness in and out with stamping feet, and whirl the staff about until they beg to be released from jigs and reels. I think that this is home, a garden for nesting birds, the greenest grass, the smiling face of a clock. So my next poem was written during the first lockdown in 2020, when I spent an awful lot of time at my desk gazing out of the first floor window onto the street. And I started to recognize the regular dog walkers and people coming past, and in particular, a rather dignified older man with a stick. And I always knew he was coming because I could hear the stick before I saw him. And he often looked up in my direction. And we started a sort of silent communication of waving to each other. And that inspired this series of haiku, which I wrote for him before we'd actually talked and got to know each other. And I'm very glad to say, I called him Sir Incognito, that Sir Incognito is actually in the audience today. So this is the poem I wrote for Malcolm before I knew he was called Malcolm. The tap of your stick alerts me. You swivel right, walking with purpose. Dark glasses disguise, calf-length boots and winter coat, protective armour. You look up to find me, waiting at the window. We wave, smile and nod. Who and what are you, my new old friend of 5 weeks? You spell out 80. I mime disbelief. The years have not compressed you, your calm dignity. Sir Incognito, I salute you as I rise from my writing desk. We both will survive on unexpected greetings, filling the absence. While my hair grows grey, uncut, you pace the weeks, months. We both mark time's tread. Two more, do you think? Okay. So the next poem was inspired by one of Bob's favourite photographic subjects, the solitary tree. And you can see the photo next door. And it was taken at Nab End above Cowside Beck. That's right, isn't it? And below the road from Arncliffe to Malham. And it's called Hawthorn. I'm whitethorn, quickthorn, fairy tree, May, foot rooted in the limestone grikes. I grow where others weaken in the wind blast blow. My coat is bark not weave of brown and grey. I dance with gales, embrace the falling snow, while bedrock keeps me anchored deep below. When I wear my bud-burst leaves, it's spring. I thrive and swell with blossoms sweet and white, as song-stretched days are drenched in summer light. My visitors are hundreds on the wing. My thorn-sharp arms protect my modest height, shelter nesting birds from hawk or kite. In winter, my stark branches stroke the sky. I offer ruby haws to those that fly. My lone thorn seeds are spread and multiply. I'm going to read two more poems, and the first one is one that I wrote for Bob particularly because I was amused by his enthusiasm for fog. And apparently he's got a sixth sense for when it's going to be foggy up on Ilkley Moor, and leaps out of bed very early to run up and take some amazing photographs before it all goes. So here is Exposure. He prefers fog, the way it holds the trees in grey aspic, leaves their trunks glistening. He runs up the moor past cup and ring graffiti, scored in the millstone grit. He has to be quick to catch those winter arms grasping the air, larches looming out of the gloom. His shutter frame eye lines up the shot, a black and white wink before the morning sharpens edges. Firs resume their sentry duty, and day puts on her green coat. Sorry, I'm just looking for another poem inspired by one of Bob's photos, because Bob's a very keen cyclist and I think was in heaven when the Tour de France came to Yorkshire in 2014. And he took this incredible photo, which is called Grand Départ, Côte de Cray. I don't know if you want to say exactly where the
yeah, it's up the
photo was taken.
The climb, which is commonly known as Kidstones, from Cray. And it, it was an amazing day. Yorkshire put on an incredible display of sunshine, and the roads were closed. So thousands of cyclists, local cyclists, were able to follow the route of Tour de France out through Yorkshire, back into the Dales, and we all camped out on either up at the climb from Cray, or some people went a bit further, and waited for the best riders in the world to cycle past. And there were thousands and thousands of people on these hills where you never normally see anybody. It was a revelation. It's extraordinary.
And when I looked at the photograph, I saw this sort of mass of people as one organic sort of whole with huge insect eyes on the back of their helmets. So this is Grand Départ, Côte de Cray. A surge of wheels, piston limbs and taut bums power past in silence, swathed in cheers. The crowd leans in, cameras primed to snap the blur of heroes in the slipstream's flow. Lycra legs, insect heads, They ride as one enormous beast, a swaying, throbbing pulse. A gust of heat blows through, and then they're gone. The peloton moves on, devouring miles. Thanks very much, and thanks to everyone. So many people coming. It's so lovely to see you all.
Can I actually say a special thanks to Emma and Bob for sharing so much of themselves, so much of their process and the genesis of the project and how it came to this wonderful fruition. Can we thank Helen Mort for her brilliant contribution? And can I also thank you for being a most brilliant audience? Thank you very much, everybody. There's an opportunity to go through and get a glass of wine in the most wonderful 1930s champagne coupes, which are just beautiful. I'll be counting them, so thank you for them. And also to buy loads and loads of books and get them signed. And any questions you can ask the writer and the photographer when you get your books. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.